Good evening and welcome to this edition of the show. So we've been talking about Ghana all the time, and we've been having a conversation with ourselves about where is our country going, where did it come from, and why are we where we are. So we decided in our production team to develop a new series as part of our program called the Ghana Conversations. So tonight we begin the Ghana Conversations, and our first guest for Ghana Conversations tonight will be Mr. Herbert Mensah. And Herbert Mensah is a Ghanaian, and that's one of the qualifications to be interviewed on the Ghana Conversations. Now, he's a guy who grew up in Ghana. He was born to a legendary family. His father is B.A. Mensah, the famous businessman of the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. B.A. passed not too long ago. Herbert comes from that stock. He attended Adom-Otchere School and public school in England, and then he worked for his father's company, the Rothmans International. They used to grow and sell cigarettes in Ghana, among other businesses. Herbert then went back to London and studied in England. He worked in Germany, where he was into cars and all of that. But people of my generation will remember Herbert for what has now become a staple in Ghanaian homes, DSTV. Herbert Mensah was one of those who led the effort in bringing DSTV in Ghana and importantly, marketing it across Ghana, the DSTV cable television, the direct-to-home television service, which is now part of most Ghanaian lives. Herbert was part of that. And then Herbert was also part of the mobile phone industry, the mobile phone revolution. Millicom Ghana Limited, which was the original owner of Mobitel, which has now gone through so many phases, bars, etc., etc. Now we call it Tigo. Herbert Mensah was one of those who began that revolution with that one. And then he was also a sportsman. He was big in rugby. But the real watershed moment that thrust Herbert into Ghana's political sort of historical analysis was an event around 1998, 1999, just before the passing of the old Asante Hino Tumfo Pokuwari. There were agitations in Kumasi about the job of Kotoko chairman, and people were looking for a dynamic person. At that time, Kotoko's fortunes was almost like it is now, and people were looking for a dynamic person to revive the fortunes of the great Asante Kotoko. In those days, being Kotoko chairman would be one of the top 5 or maybe 6 jobs in Ghana. You would have the president of Ghana, vice president, maybe speaker of parliament, you have Unilever boss, you have Guinness chairman, you will have the Asante Hine, and then there was Kotoko chairman. It was always in there, whether 1 to 5 or 1 to 6. So Herbert became Asante Kotoko chairman, and he brought a lot of different kind of marketing to football. He handled the job with distinction. Kotoko became a spectacle, and the Kotoko House rivalry rose up, and the stadiums began to be full again. Now, before then, it was like what we have today. People were not going to the stadium. Kotoko could play a game, and 100 people were in the Kumasi Sports Stadium, which at that time took about 25,000. Now it takes 40,000. But Herbert came in, and the stadium was full again. The rivalry with Hasselhoff was big. Local football became a big deal across Africa. Researchers were flying in to understand what had happened to Asante Kotoko. Kotoko who traveled to North America to play international football. They go through London to Heathrow Airport, and the way in which they were attired, some people mistaking them for Bayern Munich or Manchester United. That was the pedigree that Herbert Mensah took Kotoko up to, set up a newspaper for Asante Kotoko, etc., etc. So if he came into the Kotoko job, it being maybe the 6th most important, he brought it to about the 2nd, really. After President of Ghana, the next big item was Herbert Mensah, Kotoko chairman. And many young people of my generation sort of learned from him, respected what he did, and he gathered the media around, told the media how powerful they were. He energized the Ghanaian media to write about the things that were necessary for government. And then came 2000 elections. Many believe that Herbert has supported the MPP effort to remove the NDC from government, and then the MPP government came into effect. He worked with the government sometimes on boards, Ghana Telecom, etc., etc., but he continued to dominate the headlines as Asante Kotoko chairman. Eventually, confusion broke out, and Herbert was no longer in the job. In the spare time, he sort of gave support to King Faisal and many other clubs within the football industry. Herbert is believed to have worked in election 1998 with the NDC and to help Professor Mills to come back to power. So Herbert is quite controversial. You know, he's here, he's there, and some people also criticize him. They don't know him that well. Some want to know him better. They want to know about his family life. But recently, over the last 2 years, many of the posts that Herbert Mensah has put on Facebook about Ghana has had high record viewings if you look at Facebook. Tonight we are bringing him in the studio. Some of you may have read and seen his photos and videos on Facebook where he's talking critically about Ghana. Tonight we'll talk about everything. It's about the Ghana conversations. What kind of a Ghana did Herbert Mensah grow up in? What kind of a Ghana did he see when he became an adult? And what kind of a Ghana do we have now? And why have we gotten to where we've gotten to? After the break, the Ghana Conversations begins with the first edition with Herbert Mensah. He'll join me in the studio. He's a thick, tall guy, those who've not seen him before. Herbert used to have, I think he still has, one of the best gymnasiums in Accra. It's in his house in Osu on the ground floor. And he's very, very well built. So look out for a very huge man in the studio after the break. We're going to hear two messages, important ones from our sponsors, Airtel and Casapreco. And when they have had their say, we'll come into the studio and have a conversation with Herbert Mensah. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, tell your friend to tell his friend that Herbert Mensah is here with us in the first edition of the Ghana Conversations. And you can send your email on goodeveningghana@gmail.com. We'll be talking about a lot of matters. Controversial Herbert is here. And I have to say that for me personally, interviewing Herbert is a great inspiration because I used to listen to you, Chairman. You know, from your old house in Osu?
Yes.
The other one?
Yes.
When you first started DSTV and all that.
That's right.
And I used to come there in the company of Kwabena Eboa. Komla was always there, of course. Remember your relationship with him and how you helped him to be bold in the 1990s on snitch investigations and all of that. And how at Joy FM we used to call you and run stories by you and you give us the oxygen to let it go. And when we were afraid, we'd come and hide in your house all the time. Those were good days.
They were good days. Important days.
And why did you devote so much of your time without getting paid for it to talk to young journalists and tell them, because every journalist was in your house, sports journalists, political journalists, they were always coming.
Yeah.
And you used to have some breakfast sessions with us. Why were you doing that? Were you seeking political office at that time? I'm talking 99, 98?
No, definitely not. I think that I've always believed that you should share whatever that you can. And I grew up in a world where people come together and they talk about what is wrong or what they aspire to, but nobody moves. Everybody moves in a crowd. And from the time I was 13, 14 years old, I always understood that to move ahead, you have to move ahead as an individual. When I met some of the people that you mentioned, yourself included, and I want to compliment you today on changing the way forward. You know, if you're the same, you don't progress. I see you've changed the set, you've changed yourself, you remake yourself. And it's so important. I think that we are an extraordinary nation. I was born in my village in Kumo, and I'm born Ghanaian. I had an extraordinary mother who brought me up and who educated me. Not my father, it was my mother, who was an extraordinary woman. And I met enough people with potential, real potential, that I know that if you invest in them, if you just open the door a little bit for brilliance, and all of the ones that you've mentioned plus more, have had extraordinary brilliance. I remember you talk about media, people like Kwame Safakai when he was at Radio Gold as a young person.
Kwame
Banyako, Fifi Banson, all of them in the early days when we were doing Max Breach and the rest. And you saw an energy, you saw an integrity, you saw a willingness to question. That for me is fundamental. And all of you. I mean, you and I argue every time we meet. You know, we agree, we disagree, and then we call each other later. And that is some of the things that are missing in the system. So seeing that potential, letting people like Komla know that it's a spark, do it, go it. Don't be afraid. If you stand for the truth, there's nothing you should worry about. Yes, in our sycophantic society, you'll make enemies. After a while, people will know what you stand for. So I've tried, and even to this day, I motivate young people. I try and give people inspiration to be stronger, to be bolder, which in many ways is the reason I am seen 1 minute as, oh, is he with the MPP? Oh, is he with the NDC? Actually, I'm for what is right. And what is fundamentally wrong, I take a position. So you end up losing friends who are expecting sycophancy or expecting you to toe the line. And there are very few people that I've met senior to myself who have that flexibility to say, oh, you know, Paul has a difference of opinion on this, difference of opinion on that. He agrees with me on this. Isn't that the new global way? So meeting young people with fantastic potential. And I think that we go to the end of where we are and we come to the beginning. That if people who run things in this country were prepared to reach out to people like yourself, some of the other people, some of the people who are here today, and recognize that they have got special and unique talents, and they don't have to agree with us, and therefore they could contribute to make Ghana a much better place.
When I said to somebody I was going to do Ghana Conversations, you were the first guest, he wanted me to ask you, you know, in Ghana we have categorizations of people, Dadaba, Ijaba, you know. So what kind of a person are you? Because easily the statistics that we pull out make you a posh Dadaba guy who doesn't understand the ordinary people. You're born by BMS and live in the airport residential, Adom-Otchere school, public school in England, university in England. Are you from the Dadaba stock? And that's not a bad thing.
No, it's not necessarily. But yes, it is, and no, it isn't a bad thing.
So is that what you are?
No.
But you were born by BMS.
But I'm a street guy.
You didn't live on the street, live in the airport residential area?
Only little period. Then I lived in Okaishi. My father kicked me out when I was about 9, 10 years old, 11 years. And I moved with my mother.
What could you have done to be kicked out?
I think it was the close affinity to my mother. I was very close to my mother.
Was it a polygamous family?
No, we were 4 children at the time with, and
Same mother?
same mother, very strong lady. And you sometimes get, like my daughters are incredibly close to me, you know, they're bonded to me, sometimes more so than to their own mothers, apart from Twane in London, beautiful girl. So and I came from the UK and I was kicked out. So my period in Achimota, I lived in Okaishi. There were occasions I walked from Okaishi to Achimota. You know, my mother didn't have much.
So you're in what, Form 1?
Form 2, I came to Form 2 to Form 5.
Okay.
And then my mother sold virtually everything she had for me to get back, to give me a better exposure and education.
So you're in Achimota for all of O-level?
Yes, 3
years.
years.
Did you take the O-levels here?
I did.
Okay. But you went to sixth form elsewhere?
I did sixth form in Europe.
Okay.
Courtesy of my mother. So I lived in Okaishi next to Metropole with my cousin who also did well in that environment, Professor Nyako, who's the provost at New York University right now. Yeah, extraordinary economist. So that's actually where I grew up. And I grew on the street there. And you know, in Okaishi in those days, it wasn't as nice as it is now. If you misbehave, you know you're in trouble. And I was a troublesome, hot-headed kid. So that was my grounding.
So then you came back, grew up, and came back to work for your father's company. Did you reconcile with him?
No, actually, from sixth form, which I did in the UK, then my father appeared at some points in my life, you know, as I achieved. And I achieved socially, not necessarily academically. Yes, I went through sixth form. I'm an economist by training, etc., etc. But
you studied economics at the university?
Yes, at Sussex University.
Okay.
And specialized in development economics.
I see.
And then I went to work in the city in the UK. I left and went to work in Belgium for a period with a company called Casali, and I was then sent to Zimbabwe. So I lived in Zimbabwe.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So
From Belgium, you were sent to Zimbabwe to work for the same company?
Yes, I wasn't a country manager. I was one of a team working there as an expat in
Harare.
In Harare. And
Mugabe.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Beautiful.
Great respect for the man. Great respect.
Okay.
Great respect for the man. And so I lived there just after end of UDI for a period there, working in the farms, the auction floors, living in Zim. And then my father asked the company if they would release me, which was another discussion. Because I've always grown up believing that I'm an individual. And even those from the favored families, I look at them often and say, why should you look to beyond your education to be still trying to live off your parents? You need to get in and contribute. And that often is the problem with people who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth, because they grow up thinking they're their parents. Their parents are out of date or antiquated. They're still carrying the flag. They respect, yes. But get in and take that education and contribute to society. When I was in Kotoko, nobody said, oh, that's B.M. Mensah's son.
People didn't know that.
They didn't know. There was no need for them to know, because I enjoy the fact that I'm self-made.
And those who found out, they didn't believe it.
Yeah. And I enjoy the fact that I'm self-made. I run my own businesses. I run cellular telephony. I was doing over $100 million
so were you in
here
touch with your
outside
other
of Ghana.
siblings? Because I know one of your brothers is also doing exceptionally well globally. Were you in touch with them?
Yes and no.
And then your sister is a
I've
judge.
always been close to her.
Is she a high court judge? Though?
She's a judge in the UK, the first circuit court judge, and moving up. First circuit black lady as a circuit court judge in the UK. Famous for some of the recent judgments.
And that's your sister?
Yes.
Same mother, same father?
Same mother, the eldest of us from our stock.
And the Goldman Sachs guy is your brother. Is he still
He's the youngest. No, I think he's with Merrill Lynch, Bank of America. I think he's number 3 in that organization.
There was a major campaign to bring him into Ghana as the governor of the central bank, but that's another conversation. So, were you in touch with them?
Yes and no. I've always been a loner. My sister, yes, because Barbara and I grew up together. And she's one of the women that I believe is a role model for anybody. A strong woman who has fought within the system to achieve what others could not achieve. Takes no nonsense. Extraordinary. She has adopted children. She's the greatest cook I know. And she's a stickler for integrity and a straight line.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I got to be careful.
We'll get to that on the whole Anas video saga. So you came back and worked for your father in Ghana?
Briefly, until then. Again, I worked for him for about a year or so, a year and a half. I can't even remember the exact time. And then I was actually dismissed. That's what.
Oh, by him again?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then you went back?
Then I continued doing my business globally.
Okay. So the kind of Ghana that you saw when you came back to work for your father, for instance, what did you find? Who was president then? Was it Achampong? Was it Rawlings?
It was President Rawlings.
Oh, so this what?
President, we're
PNDC.
talking, yeah, PNDC.
What kind of a Ghana did you? So did you come in the 70s, late 70s, the Achampong era? Were you coming?
I was in and out.
Okay.
I mean, I did a university from 1980 to 83. So,
Okay.
you know, I was not actually in town when the
All this stuff,
mayhem was going on.
But
No.
what kind of a Ghana did you know at that time?
You know, I've known Ghana in different formats. I've known it in the 60s when I was young, but it was certainly, we seemed to take pride in being part of the global world.
In the 60s?
Yes. There was a global standard, and you can see, even if you see the old tapes of the Tolona and the rest of them, how they conducted themselves. Even in Europe, we used to see videos of them as they dealt with their people, and you could see a level of globalization in terms of their presence and so forth. And I think that even in the 70s, it was interesting to see where people demonize the 70s in many ways. But we shouldn't forget that the greatest industrial growth that we had in Ghana was in the 70s.
By Africans.
By Africans. You've hit it on the point, the nail on the head. You again take us to a conclusion as to why Ghana is not doing what it should do.
Why were we able to achieve that in the 70s, creating the businesses of your father, of Sian, of Boache and others, you know, creating indigenous businesses ahead of Syrian and Lebanese opportunities and giving Ghanaians the role? What did we do then that made us be able to do that?
I think that the 70s evolved out of the 60s. The various struggles, be they political and the rest. Once you went through independence and you then went through post, I know my friends in the CPP and its assigns will dispute that, but once we actually went beyond that period, there was a time where people who had the creativity to get involved in business, and we shouldn't forget that the politicians do not understand that businessmen are natural. They are not made. You can't give somebody a political appointment and give him business and it'll succeed over a 10, 20, 30-year period. They succeed because they have advantage.
But that's an interesting philosophy that people will challenge it. So the point you're making is businessmen are naturally grown.
Absolutely. Look, when you cut out the heart of business in the late 70s, 80s, you couldn't replace them.
No, we haven't.
With the political businessmen. The political businessmen came and were successful whilst their political party was in power. They destroyed the structure of what they had seized, inherited, taken on. And then they tried to replace it with things they couldn't. And now, because they didn't want to go back, everything came to $68,000. That means the balance, we are paying for it ourselves. From that day to this day, it hasn't been paid. It's been signed off.
Really?
Signed all the way to the top. It hasn't been paid. So,
why?
Because I think we have people who run the system who think it's a joke. I'm saying, until you can actually turn around and say, this is your job, you're not doing it right, fired. You're there serving the people, for heaven's sake. You're not there serving yourself. Somebody who governs this country, somebody who runs things, must for once get up and have the courage to say, this is the standard, so that the people who don't have anything know that they're safe. Everybody should not be
People are sending mails and asking, I mean, some just joined us 10 minutes ago. They're saying, what's going wrong? Why is Herbert screaming in the studio? What has he done again? Well, we are beginning the introduction of, as part of Good Evening Ghana, inside Good Evening Ghana, the Ghana Conversations. This is our first edition. We're having a conversation about Ghana. What's wrong with our country? Why are we where we are? And what can be done about it? So we are selecting some people, and I gave an introduction about Herbert, why he qualifies to be a maiden speaker on Ghana, on the Ghana Conversations. Maybe you have missed that, but you know, that's what we're talking about today. So Herbert is my guest. This program will be repeated on television, so you can see it. We'll also load it up on our YouTube channel. But we can't go back now that much. But if you just joined us, you're watching the Ghana Conversations. Herbert Mensah is a maiden edition. So let's come back. So you're talking about the top.
I'm just saying, yes, for me, we should stop blaming the little people and look at the top. And I've said it many times, I've said it on your program before, that we really need to look and say, what is the benchmark of appointee? What are the targets that are set, and what is the level of accountability? You see, because, look, Paul, some of us have witnessed May 9th and people dying and being involved in people's lives. On June the 3rd, I was in South Africa, unfortunately, and I switched as I landed. There were text messages and people coming through about it, and my heart just broke out. And I just thought, the loss of a life. And you know what? It's always the poor people. And I wonder whether sometimes in these tragedies, what would happen if it was actually the rich, the elite, the members of government or other rest? Would there then be a change? What would happen if people who were driving around Goyle at that time of the night were actually the people who control power from either side of the aisle? And then it is that they died, and everybody is now very sorry. And we now start looking into who is responsible for tanks that were leaking. What was the level of responsibility that goes to the top? Because if Volkswagen today tried to misbehave with emissions tests, Paul, I doubt that the CEO would have known about what was going in the system. But you know what? He's the CEO.
Yeah, he took responsibility.
He must be. And you remember one of your first programs, you asked me, didn't I blame President Rawlings for my father's business? Remember what I said to you? I said he's responsible.
Yes.
He must take responsibility. I said it then. There's no point in trying to cover the truth or to murk it up. But if you go through that, and you go through other things, and we go through issues that have happened under President Mills, under President Kufuor, or even under President Rawlings, what is wrong, and what is right. And if you take public office, it is not for us to serve you. It is for you to serve us and be accountable for the actions. Paul, is it not just in the 70s and 80s that people were taken for causing economic crime, for causing economic loss? Is that not why some of our parents and the rest went through that? Is it not the same standard? You cannot create two standards. And today in Ghana, I think that the differences that you say is that the world has become smaller. And yet it is in Ghana we've set a standard for ourselves that is incredibly low. And therefore, wrongdoing is accepted and is masked through committees and other things. And then nobody is held accountable to the people for what ultimately goes wrong. So it then transcends its way down, right the way down into unborn babies, problems in hospitals, people's living conditions. It goes all the way down. But if people start getting held accountable, people will not be rushing for public jobs. They understand that this is my job. If I fail at it, and the failure is not about the color of my suit or making international trips, etc., it's about being able to account in terms of productivity, looking after people, responsibilities to the general public. If it is a business or an industry where you're expected to provide service to the people, then there is a standard. And these days, there's a global standard.
I see, that's interesting. How was Ghana was in 99, 2000? That led you to sort of join the bandwagon against the ruling party.
You know, at that point in time, I was dragged into football.
By Kwabena Eboa.
You blame him, Kwabena, you are in trouble there. Absolutely, because it wasn't my intention at all. I had grown up and witnessed sides of Ghana that I didn't understand or I didn't accept. I believe that any form of extremism needed to be managed because there's always a jubilation, and after it settles, where do you go? So I've always kept a very low profile, which is why, for example, I've always lived in Osu. I've never lived in a proper residential area. I've lived in Osu for the last 25 years, or on and off. And I've been sort of particularly careful over that period in terms of looking. So
I see. So in 2000, you thought what? Systems must change?
Not really. I'd taken over Kotoko, and I found that Kotoko was now fighting against the political system. I didn't realize that was the case, but I realized at the time that my dear friend E.T. Mensah and his assigns clearly had a different agenda. And my great friends at Hearts of Oak, it wasn't a football match. You know, I could buy Charles Taylor from Adikoka at Olympics, and then the player then goes to Hearts, and the check is given to me by, well, I think it was actually by the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and not by not by the club. Absolutely. So, you know, clearly there was a different agenda. I came in to meet Adom-Otchere and Kwabena, having left Kotoko to Hearts without contract, without paper. You know, there was something. And you're either going to run this team by standing up and taking on the system, which is what I did. It didn't matter who was in power. At the time, it happened to be the NDC who was in power. And therefore, you had to take them on to protect the integrity of Kotoko, build up the supporters. And you see, the average man is looking for somebody who is prepared to recognize his pain and respect it, which is what we did. We took his pain and we respected his pain. That is what is missing today.
After the break, we'll continue with the conversation. Herbert Mensah would be with me, and we'll take your emails. goodeveningghana@gmail.com. I'm sure that you're enjoying this program. Send your emails in. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Thank you, Chairman, for staying with us.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, the reaction we are getting from your emails is massive. Thank you so much. And when I called you today about this show, yesterday I think we spoke, you said I should get more time. And it looks like we would have needed a lot of time. So let's cut a few things out and come straight forward on it. Okay, so if we have to have a prescription for Ghana, Ghana is a human being who is sick and has been diagnosed to have a disease that is taking him downward spiral. If we have to have a prescription for Ghana, what will that prescription be?
I think that you'd have to break it into a short, medium, and long term. You know, unfortunately, for those who are politically inclined, they look at 4-year cycles. I would beseech His Excellency the President to look in the short term, and that is reinstill confidence in the institutions in Ghana. And the only way you can do that is by taking people on. Taking in the wrongdoers, whether it is GIDA, RLG, whether it is issues on the judiciary that you have the power to do, on other matters of wrongdoing. We have it from both sides of the political aisle. I think there's one member of parliament now, Makin or something, who's involved in something involved in. So investigate it properly and have them, you know, let people see that
so we must
action.
Have the political order, instilling confidence.
Absolutely. Bring back a set of fear for wrongdoing, not fear for fear's sake. It's not about AK-47s, but fear for wrongdoing. So that therefore there's a standard starts to go up. You know that if you do wrong, this is what's going to happen. It's not a comedy show where we say, oh, this person did wrong, and then we move on to the next.
So the police is an important part of this.
The police is very important. We've got great policemen. We shouldn't forget that. But we need to then go, and it's not about, we've seen now it's not about the police. There are much bigger issues. And there have been bigger things that have occurred. And we've had committees, and we've had investigations. I think that I would almost beg His Excellency to get to a point where people are now brought forth accountable, jailed, removed, dismissed as a matter of course, interdicted because the public need to come back and have a sense that whoever is leading the country, so His Excellency the President, is going to protect their interests, not simply by saying, I will look into it and nothing happens. So I think that's the short term. That process alone starts to weed out people who should not be holding high office, whether it's on boards of directors, whether it is in other areas of public office, whether it is as ministers or junior ministers. It's right across the board because they're brilliant people in Ghana. We meet them every day. And why are none of them in public office? So I think that process then takes you through to the next. Then it is you need to turn around and say, how do we reinvigorate the country and really get it back working again?
To get great people into public office,
absolutely.
Into the police service, into the military.
Yes, so you talk about personnel and bring back integrity and get back people having a sense that this person is in office, you respect him. You look at him and you say, how did I grow up? I grew up knowing that people were ministers or in the forces or wherever, and you immediately had a sense of reverence and respect for the position because you knew they were beyond reproach. It never came to you
so when you were growing up, you see a judge.
Oh,
there's amazing respect for him.
Of course, absolutely.
Because you knew he was beyond reproach.
Oh, yes.
So you saw a police DSP.
Yeah, absolutely.
A police commander.
Absolutely.
ACP, ACOP, DCOP.
Absolutely.
A military colonel.
Absolutely. And people in hospitals. People
a university professor.
Absolutely. People in schools. Even people in the media. You know, Paul, as we drop our standards, even with the media, we grew up knowing that if you wanted to get your tonation and speak properly, if it's the English language, you watch the television.
And you listen to GBC. Yes, I grew up like that,
You know what I'm saying?
There's a program called Everyday English.
Absolutely. So you'd listen to them speaking and listening to them understand. And even at this stage, my father-in-law, ABK Dadzi, professor of English, every so often he'll correct me as I'm speaking. So you could take that as a standard that took you outside and took you globally in terms of where you went. And I think those standards need to be brought back so that the quality of people that we take, be they teachers, be they police people, be they nurses, be they doctors, it's not just about the politicians. And Paul, I think you have a great program here. I would just like to reach out to people and say, when you watch this program, take off your political hat. Because my comments are not directed at the NDC. It's directed at politicians. They're directed at people who hold public office. And if people can start to do that and say, look, this is a great thing that you're doing here. Come and listen to the program. Listen to the angles. Don't shut your eyes and ears because maybe you don't like what they're saying about one of your political people, and think about Greater Ghana. So I think that's the medium. And then the people who actually run the system, the economies of the system, have to understand that Ghana is we're almost bankrupt. I mean,
there's no money anywhere.
You and I have spoken about this over the years, and it's just dovetailed, and we have seen it coming. And you actually now need to turn around and say, yes, you can go to global institutions. But I frankly feel at some point in time that once you start dealing with the right people, you can go to people who have got considerable sums of money and say, how do we bring in $7 to $9 to $10 billion over a period to ease where we are? And it can only go hand in hand when you're dealing with corruption, you're dealing with perceptions of corruption, you're dealing with right appointees, you're changing the system so that the businessman who is suffering today, knows that the process of making an application for something, for it to be signed off, is like in Rwanda, in Kigali, where the president himself is head of the GIPC. He's in charge. You want to invest? The time period, land, opportunities, it doesn't take. One of my friends had 4 years to wait to get a piece of paper stamped. So the cost of money and investment is going a certain way. When businesses today are leaving Ghana for Ivory Coast and for other countries, there's something wrong. When businesses are keeping quiet because they're not sure how the system is going to take it, it's all wrong. Capital has a choice, Paul. And people have to understand that capital breeds capital, money breeds money. So if you start dealing with people who have got that wealth, who've got that access to money. The days I was dealing in telephony, we were doing 8, 10, 12, $14 million a month. You must be able to pick up the phone and have that connectivity that people will turn around and say, oh, yes, sir, but I do understand. We can do this and that. It's not just about application forms and going through the processes.
So you're saying that first fix the system, get the integrity back in the system. Then it is you can go to a businessman like Richard Branson, Donald Trump, whoever, Asia, with a great team of people who are thinkers and who are businessmen. And he can say, I'll give Ghana $10 billion. And he can believe that he can put that money in Ghana, and there will be integrity to protect it, there's talents to grow it, etc., etc. That's the model that you're sort of talking about.
It becomes something like that. I mean, if it is, I mean, I was in Zimbabwe just after Rhodesia, and I remember Ian Smith, in days of UDI, knew that Rhodesia was in trouble. So what did he do? He went to the John Braden camps and Tabor's and the businessmen and said, how do we make this work? It's not a political decision. It's how do we make it work? I went to Malaysia one time with the ex-famous prime minister in power, and I had the honor of meeting Tundaim and his people in terms of finance. And I was told that, look, he would sit in office, speak to his ministers, turn around, and then speak to businessmen who he knew were global businessmen and say, does this work or does this not work? What really are your problems? How do we shrink it so that we can serve the people and we can take care of business? Take care of business and tax business. Make sure business is doing right, and then invest the money with transparency for people to see.
So you're one of those who think that without private sector business growing in the hands of black people, we're not going nowhere.
Not necessarily black. Look, I was the other day at a company in the industrial area. I do May 9th every year for the families. And the first person to raise his hand every year and support me is an extraordinary businessman called Haitham Fakri. Lebanese origin, owns Interplast, exports to 23, 24 countries in Africa. Born in Ghana, his father was born in Ghana. So
I see.
You
Second generation Lebanese.
There we go. You see, so we have to be very careful about putting everybody into the pot. But I think people get the general idea of what it is that we're saying.
So we get great businessmen to lead.
Absolutely.
With the support of government.
Because great businessmen actually don't care about politicians. They just want to do business. You borrow money today against a project, you've probably got a 10-year...
What about our universities, educational institutions at the tertiary level? Is that part of the process? Must that be fixed as well?
I think so. I think that you've got to raise the standard right the way through. I think the way that we tutor...
Of professors, of students?
I think everything.
I don't know whether we have enough time, but I wanted to ask you about, is there still a possibility for somebody to pick up Kotoko and Hearts again and make it great again?
They have to. Just imagine football, La Liga in Spain without Barcelona and Real Madrid. Just imagine...
Can we get back to the point where, I mean, when I was in the university, people would sit in a bus and go to Kumasi to watch Kotoko and Hazakas.
Yeah.
Which was what it was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And by the time you took over, it wasn't like that.
Empty.
I mean, Hearts of Folk would travel to those days, Afienya and places like that, or even to Ho to play Voradep, and they will be full.
Yes.
And that's how it was the energy that was in football at the time. Marketing was big. Suddenly we saw MTN coming in a very big deal for Kotoko, and it wasn't like that before. And we saw everybody coming in. Yes. Now it looks like they're going out, they're not happy with what is happening, etc., etc. Can we get there again?
We can, Paul. And I think that is a microcosm of a bigger thing. Yes, when we took over Kotoko, I remember Kwabena Yabra brought me a statement from Galka showing one match. They got new CDs, 58 CDs, the whole stadium.
Yeah.
Was a gate receipt. You see, so when you get involved, it's not about how much you shout. It's about looking at this dead product with massive potential, Kotoko, Ghana, rebranding it, and appealing to the people who matter most. The people who matter most are not the big men. No. The people who matter most are the people who go to the stadiums every single week. And I tell people, just imagine Real Madrid with no supporters. It's not Real Madrid.
No, it's not.
So, there we go. So if you then turn around and say, how do you fill the stadiums? You need to get back and give respect to the people. You can argue about gay fees and the rest of it. But then it is that you have to take pride in being a Ghanaian, which is what we did. We stopped people watching EPL. They were watching it then and drove them back into the stadiums. We made it a point of ultimate entertainment and excitement for the people who matter.
And competitive.
Totally.
And
even
controversial.
Even
when Kotoko didn't win, they will still come to the stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was one match, Kotoko for Bofakwa. It was raining so hard. And I know the referee was going to say, no game.
No game.
The supporters filled the stands and they started singing Kumasi Asante Kotoko until the referee had no choice. We played the game. It was half flooded. And you see, and after the game, what do? We go and mix with the supporters. We talk with them. We walk. When we've done badly, they'll let you hear it. Take it. That is your job. The team does not belong to you. You're working for the people. You tell them you are doing a process of taking it
Let's talk about
somewhere.
the church. Then we'll talk about chieftaincy. What do you want to say about the church in this Ghana conversation?
You know, I'm laughing because...
Or the new church, if you will.
Well,
if
yeah,
you will.
I have a problem, and I'm glad to hear that my man I respect, Archbishop, will be coming onto your program.
He will
soon.
be on the Ghana conversation.
And I'm glad he will, because, you know, I do like the man a great deal. But churches are just generalization. Again,
I'm talking about the new charismatic
that's why
church.
I'm going. For me, that's not me. I think that we have to be very careful. I'm a man of faith, but I'm also not a hypocrite. And I get very worried where people are using churches simply to either take advantage of the weak in terms of making money from them. I'm not sure if the diagnosis of the preaching in terms of what the biblical word is being done with the transparency and honesty that Jesus and our Lord God so desired. And I have a problem with it because there is a fixation on something that goes beyond the obvious. And I am of the old school where I can go into the church by myself and say a prayer. I can go to an early morning mass with 1 or 2 people. There are 15 people. It's not a fashion parade. I'm not into the issue of how much money we give, etc., etc. And I think that you need to empower people rather than disempower them. And I think that is another issue for perhaps another time.
We'll talk again. Hopefully we'll bring you back again. Chieftaincy, do you have something to say about it? Chieftaincy.
Only that in my introduction you made a big mistake. And that you flattered me beyond what I deserved. And at one point you talked about position. No, there's only one king in Ghana, whether people like it or not, and that's Otumfuo. So there's no number 2 or 3, unless you're putting him ahead of the president for the people who believe in Otumfuo. If you don't, then you have to put him after the president.
Do you think chieftaincy is a good thing?
I think it's
well,
part of
growing up in England, you're used to it.
I think it's part of our culture. And I think that there needs to be a crossover. And as I said, I had the honor of sitting with Otumfuo recently at his home in the UK. And there's so much that people don't understand about Otumfuo as a global being. He is a global being. I mean, he goes to the IMF. He talks on Ghana business. He has an accountancy background. He is massively respected when it is that he goes outside. I love the effects. I hope this is Ghana just reminding us that we are in Ghana, about to have a little doomsday moment.
But can we go on? Are we on TV? Can we go on? Okay, all right. So, sorry, I'm asking that because a few lights went off in the studio and they're still flashing.
I love it. It makes your program real.
Interesting. I see. That's quite interesting. I'm still talking to Herbert Mensah on the Ghana conversations. Can we do the Clotte Kole thing because he talked about Osu? Okay, so can you put up the photographs here? You said you talked about Osu. I'm going to ask you about Clotte Kole. So this is Aneta Rollins, who is just joined into the political stuff. Does he have a chance of winning? Do you want to talk about it?
Well, I'm a resident of Osu. I've lived in Osu for 25 years. And Kole Clotte is a very important area. It's an area that in their own little way, we are mini landlords, if you can call it that, because there are not many middle-class people who are living in those kind of areas. But I've lived there. I lived at St. Barnabas Church for 10, 11 years. And then I've been at Nyaniba Osu border for beyond. So I think that in any election, yes, I think she could. I'm not sure what her strategy is. it is clearly a delegate-chair election. She is fighting against an incumbent who is from the area, indigenous to the area, has served 3 terms or 2 terms, going into the 3rd term. There are massive difficulties. I believe she has the support of her family, so if she has the right strategy, she'll win. But it's pivotal because, you know, the implications actually of winning are huge. The implications of losing are bigger.
I see. That's interesting. What about the Ninoy, the MPP candidate? So there's going to be a big fight in Osu, isn't there?
I think Ninoy is an interesting character because I met him. I asked him to come and see me, as I do most people, because that's my area and I need to understand and to see. And I know he had a battle with Philip, a gentleman who I love dearly and I have a lot of respect for. But it's very difficult when you are not full-time in terms of the area. Ninoy has the advantage that he's an Osu boy. I mean, that's where he lives. He's on the ground. I think he handles land guards and people like that. And I believe a lot of his money and funding is coming from the people.
I see. That's interesting.
So if the dispute is settled, I'm not sure if it is, between Philip and himself. If it's not, then we have to wait and see. But if it is, if we play the hypothetical game, then he'll be a very difficult candidate for either Adom-Otchere or Senator Rawlings to defeat, simply because he is with the people. He's very humble. And he represents, I think, the new Ghana going forward.
I see. That's interesting. What's your last word on this program as our power is still shaky? What would you say?
I say congratulations, Paul. I say to people, be critical, have strength, have faith, be critical, challenge the system. Please, this business that I am with one political area or another political area, if you are with the MPP and you cannot question what is going on right now, if you cannot take the fight back to the Kwabena Agyapongs, the rest of them, and tell them, you know, you represent your party. You don't go and blabber in public about what's going on. Take strength and understand who you are if you want to win the election. Then if you're with the NDC, have the strength. After all, one of the nicest gentlemen that I know is President Mahama as a person. Go and tell him. His skin may not be as thick as mine, but go and tell him that he's messing up in the areas that he is. And hope that he'll still love you for it. Even if he doesn't eventually, he'll come up. Please, you guys in the political parties do the same. I mean, Nana Akufo-Addo was my lawyer for a long time, and I respect his intellect. And you must be able to face your political leaders, who are, most of them are moving along on a wave of ego and being told they're the best and whatever else. And the fact is, things are not going right.
So let's speak the truth. Let's bring honesty back.
Bring honesty back.
Honesty,
have courage.
integrity.
Absolutely. You know there'll be little groups of people saying, get rid of him, he's the wrong person. But unless we can face that, Paul, and I think that's what you're trying to do through with your program, we're not going to progress.
Thank you, Herbert.
Thank you, Paul.
Super.
You need a longer program.
I do. I'll get one.
Make sure the people you bring to your program are fit.
I will.
Because if you have them standing for an hour, you need a wheelchair for someone.
Some of them will sit. Thank you so much, Herbert.
Thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure.
Thank you.
That was Herbert Mensah. Thanks for watching. Good night.